Next, we have our next presentation is titled Preserving the Compo Legacy. We have Dr. Anja Borck, who is the General Director at the Musée des Ondes Emile Berliner, for which she manages permanent, temporary, traveling and online exhibitions and public events. Under her direction, the MOEB has become a dynamic professional institution in the southwest part of Montreal. She currently engages 2 part-time contractors, 5 to 6 annual student interns, and a group of over 60 volunteers, seniors and students to help with the realization of many projects and activities. In 2020, the MOEB received the Governor General History Award for the Centennial Celebration of Radio Broadcasting in Canada. Mariana Mejia-Ahrens has a Master's in Information Studies from McGill University and a BA in Audio Production from Webster University. Mariana began working at the Musée des Ondes Emile Berliner in 2019 as the program coordinator for the award-winning Centennial of Broadcasting in Canada, and currently serves as the project manager for exhibitions and digitization projects. As an audio professional, Mariana has worked for Smithsonian Folkway Recordings, the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra, Royal Caribbean Cruise Line, and the Sounds in the City Soundscape Research Group, and continues to work as a live sound engineer in Montreal, Canada. Louis Rastelli is the director and was one of the 8 original co-founders of ARCMTL, a non-profit organization which is dedicated to promote and preserve Montreal's underground culture by digitizing images, graphic material, sound, and moving image all in-house. Rastelli started his writing career with writing local music producers in the mid-80s. His novel, A Fine Ending, is a fictionalized narrative of a musician who drifts through Montreal's exciting music scene.
Yeah, good afternoon from Montreal to all of you. I hope you can hear me. I think so. I'm Anja Borck, the director of the Musée des Ondes Emile Berliner. I'm here with Mariana Ahrens from the Musée des Ondes Emile Berliner, who is also the initiator of the museum to contribute to the ARSC conference, and with Louis Rastelli from ARCMTL. He will present his organization in a minute. Our presentation is about preserving the Compo legacy, a collaborative project between ARCMTL and MOEB. We would like to start with presenting our institution and introduce our project of the Compo legacy. The Musée des Ondes Emile Berliner cares about the history of sound recording and sound technology, including, of course, music recordings, while music is not our main mandate. The museum has access to the Documentary Heritage Community Program grant from the Library and Archives of Canada, which finances this project. We decided to apply for this grant because the museum can count on a good network for realizing audio digitization for archival and public purposes. The DHCP project is adjustable to our museum's ability, as we are quite limited in staff and money, a condition we share with our collaborator. The museum is in an early stage of a restructuring and professionalization, while we celebrate this year already our 30th anniversary. And I give over to Louis Rastelli to present ARCMTL.
Thank you, Anja. We've been around for about 20 years, responding to a need in Montreal that was felt in the late 90s to have an organization that focuses on independent artists, music, zines, culture, printed art, all manner of ephemera as well, concert posters, that kind of thing, old magazines. And so we've amassed quite a collection, see part of behind me, over these bunches of years. And sure enough, none of the other institutions or museums took up what we were looking to do. So it's become our niche, and it's been a real pleasure to be able to work for a few years now on various projects with Anja and the team at the Berliner Museum. We are an archive, after all, needing dissemination spaces, museums, exhibit spaces for activities, because we're just an archive. And so this has turned out to be a great project. We also are very big on digitizing and preserving material in-house. And so over the past several years, we've been trying to improve on our materials. And this project turned out to be a great opportunity to pull together and focus on a specific set of material to catalog, digitize, research together with Anja and her team and Mariana.
The scope of the project is to digitize local recordings by Compo, not accessible online at the National Archive of Canada or the Bibliothèque et Archives Nationales du Québec. The MOEB and ARCMTL are both bilingual organizations in Montreal and are both a host of a collection reflecting the Anglophone, Francophone, and Allophone history of our province. Compo is a good example of Quebec's linguistic diversity. We decided a collaboration with ARCMTL after I met Louis at different venues where I realized that the MOEB was not the only awesome organization interested in the sound history of Montreal. We decided to join forces for projects. The DHCP project seemed a fitting opportunity. I also find that Louis is a very engaged person with a broad range of interests and knowledge that would force the Musée des Ondes to look into aspects that so far did not get sufficient attention, specifically the local music culture of the vinyl age and the ephemeral objects such as packaging material, plastic bags, and so on. This project continues what the MOEB started in 2017, and we kept the objectives defined earlier on: to publish through the online archive what would allow an online experience that rather enhances the objects presented, which means we focus mostly on two-dimensional objects such as documents or records, and we also add objects that are not accessible in the full form, such as audio content of recordings. I let Mariana and Louis the word now to explain how we realized the project.
Hi, everybody. Okay, so our first step for the project was getting some research done. At the museum, this project came with great timing. We were already working on research for the Compo temporary exhibition, which will open at the museum in a couple weeks. Through this research, we had access to a variety of resources from university collections, provincial and federal archives, online collections, local researchers and collectors within our own community as well, and our own archives and library. At the museum, this research allowed us to take a deep dive into all Compo related holdings, especially our 78s collection. And focusing on 78s really aligned with the research that we were doing for the exhibition, since we were already looking into the life of Herbert Berliner and the earlier decades of the Compo Company. And Louis can share with us a little bit more details of the research that went on at ARCMTL.
Yeah, well, as an archive that's focused on independent arts and artists, record labels, people who publish their own books, put out their own records, this was a perfect subject matter to get onto. We can't ask for more than a company based in Montreal for over 60 years that specialized in putting out material from small independent labels. So our research started in-house. We had also the good fortune of having helped a documentary film right before the pandemic on the topic of a record producer from the 60s who pressed most of his records with Compo. We had already done research for that documentary in 2019, and a lot of that material was still grouped together at the archive during the pandemic. So we started with that material and continued digging through all of our records, our LPs, finding labels that records that were Compo related. We also had to do a lot of research though, as far as finding out what is pressed by Compo. The company that presses a record isn't always clearly indicated on a record. So based on what we had already looked at, we made lists of the labels that we knew were pressed by Compo. We talked to some of these producers and people to confirm whether they sometimes would press with one company, sometimes with another. Turns out only the very big records, like the Beatles records, when they were very popular, were pressed all over the place. But for the most part, people stuck to one company. We eventually figured out what matrix numbers and other clues might help us identify Compo records out of all of the records, as well as the matrix numbers for records pressed by other factories, just so that we make sure that we knew what we were dealing with. This whole existence of Compo was at a time when the Canadian market forced vendors to produce their own products. So all the records sold in Canada were pressed in Canada. Compo did a lot of pressing of American and overseas hits, labels. Decca, for example, in fact, ended up owning Compo. So we really wanted to focus on the Canadian material and the local material as much as possible. We also had to, after we figured all that out, we made our big piles and then started digging in to make our selections. I'll pass it back to Mariana for that.
Thank you. Yes, so for the selection process, our main focus, as Louis already mentioned, was identifying Compo-related objects that featured Quebecois or Canadian content or artists, and wondering if they've already been digitized at our archival standard and made available online. So these were our guiding principles for the selection process. Based on the museum's previous digitization project and the architecture of the archive that's already published online, we divided our selection by discs and documents. At the museum, the biggest effort came in selecting our 78s. We had only budgeted for 150 disc sites to be digitized for their sound. We used a grading system criteria, which looked at subject interest, content quality, rareness, documentation, and material quality. And this last one really allowed us to find the discs that were in best shape and that would allow us to have a better digital transfer. In the end, we looked at about 574 Compo press discs in the museum's collection, in an effort that took about 4 months and over 6 people of continuous work. Most of the labels that we ended up selected were Star and Apex or Apex Francais.
So in our case, as far as selection, we had a pretty natural division of labor between the organizations. The Berliner Museum focusing on the 78s and, you know, up until the 40s and 50s, and having lots of collections in that sense. We don't have a lot from those eras, although we did go through what we did have of that. We focused on the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So LPs and 45s was our domain, and we were very we were lucky to have, I mean, already after 20 years of building up the archive, some 6,000 or 7,000 vinyl discs are on the stacks, confirmed to be all Montreal material. We did, though, have to select stuff that was in good shape, tried to find stuff that was both obscure and independent and less known. Once we'd selected a certain amount of 45s and LPs, we hit the web and tried to make sure things weren't already super well documented, with entirely on YouTube, and all the metadata on Discogs. We really tried to zoom in on things that were not already well known and deserve to get better known. The other thing that is an issue with our section of the material is copyrights, given that even though in Canada there's a fairly generous copyright expiration of 50 years after the for a sound recording, the actual songs, if somebody is, you know, covering a Beatles song, for example, on a record from the 60s, it isn't in copy. You know, it's not going to be able to sit online easily without being either yanked down or flagged as copyrighted. So we did try to focus in that sense too on presenting, selecting material that would benefit from being put online, would stay on there. And then, of course, with regards to the material that we did pick, diversity of try to present the full range of styles and types of artists that were pressed by these by Compo.
Yeah, so after our selection was done, we moved on to the digitization and file creation steps. So for the museum, all our 78s were digitized by an external contractor, since the museum doesn't have its own digitization equipment. Here's a photo of the studio of our contractor where they were digitized. All files, all transfers created were also restored with isotope RX. All discs get photographed as well, because that also gets added into the online archive. And this is the setup that we use at the museum for photographing discs as well as disc sleeves. Documents, most of the documents that we selected were catalogs, and those were digitized in our office scanner. And the last bit of documents that left the museum to be scanned outside too were the archival architectural plans, because their dimensions were a lot bigger than what we could hold in our scanner.
Right. On our end, we took advantage of the project to consult with the producer involved in digitizing the material for the Berliner. It was a very experienced producer of music as well as digitization. We made sure that we were using the same outputs, same file formats, and relatively similar workflow. In our case, it started with the record player, which we got maintained, had it fixed up, lubricated, balanced. We also added a new cartridge just to be able to record mono records on a mono cartridge. It made a huge difference compared to playing or digitizing mono records with a stereo cartridge. So essentially a stereo cartridge will get too much information off a mono record, trying to find the left and right and creating a lot of noise in the meantime. So that was really a great tip that we got, and got some great results with that. We also upgraded our the digital side of things. We added a brand new external Zen-Go digital audio converter to our chain. So the turntable went through a vintage Sansui amplifier to boost the signal, and then into the Zen-Go into a Mac Studio desktop, after which the software was a Reaper was used to harvest the real-time recordings. We did switch to Audacity to trim or convert files, as well as add metadata. And in a couple of cases of noisy audio files, we did put them through Isotope to denoise. We also took very seriously the aspect of documenting the actual discs themselves and the documentary material that we come up with. We used our set of scanners to do all of the newsprint and magazines and record sleeves and other ephemeral material that we digitized for the project. But for the discs, we were able to make use of a recently set up a nice Studio Flash overhead setup that was really great to be able to use, especially with, we were photographing straight to the computer using Camera One software, shooting in RAW. We're able to verify every photo before it was taken, that everything was fine and that they were all together. We then, after they were all taken, we batch processed them in Lightroom, as you see on the right, a very efficient way to go through and tweak each of them. And we're able to output to whatever variation or file format and resolution that we needed after that. So it was definitely a big, yeah.
No, I was going to say that I forgot to mention that it was easier for each of us to do our own photo production for this project, since we were dealing with logistics and scheduling issues, a lot to do with the pandemic.
The pandemic erupted a couple times in the last few months, as I'm sure impacted others in the conference. So yeah, we would have been nice to have a lot more in-person collaboration through the various steps, but at least digitization is something you can do on your own during a pandemic, it turns out. So we kept busy. Yeah.
So while all of this was happening through the selection and digitization, we were at the same time working on metadata and documentation. This is the part of the project where Bailey and ARCMTL's archivist Janice Skerfoot were very helpful in making this part of the project happen. For the museum, a grunt of the metadata collection happened during the selection process while we were going looking at discs individually. We were collecting information like label and artist and as much information we could get at least from the label of the disc. After that, Janice and I intensely collaborated, and we spent many hours discussing how to properly describe both our collections that are meant to be presented together eventually online. So we had to create a description standard. We chose and adapted a PB Core spreadsheet to better serve our needs for description for our objects in our project. While metadata discussions were happening, we were also drafting documentation to detail workflows, also file creation and naming guidelines, as well as a metadata application profile. Now, all this work into metadata creation and planning was most fruitful when we had to deal with imports on the website. So this is a screen grab from what the archive looks today. We prepared a lot of tables to make imports into our WordPress website easier. again, divided into this architecture of two kinds of assets between disks and documents. The uploads are ongoing. We aren't done adding everything that was created for the project, but we're currently working on it. Some things that are still going to be worked on for the next couple of weeks is search improvements, mostly making sure that all the descriptive fields that we included are easy to search, as well as identifying the facets or the filtering that we can do with these facets on the left. This was a new challenge for us. The previous digitization project at the museum only focused on our collection. This time around, we are including collections that come from another institution. So we're working hard on making sure that the process works for both and that we're both showing up clearly in the website.
We are promoting the project, of course, and maybe not as much as it deserves. So we offer, for instance, a postcard with the URL, which you see here. Our statistics, however, are quite positive, I think, and they will hopefully increase with the addition. The archive is used by approximately 143 people per month, with around 60 new viewers of those 143. Users check out roughly 20 sites and have an average time that they look at a slide for 1.5 minutes. Users are coming mostly from Northern America, but also from Europe, Asia, and Australia. Important for us was the distribution of languages, and 80 users are actually using the English side, while 63 users are using the French side. So it makes the both languages worthwhile that we put so much effort in a bilingual site. The Musée des Ondes has gained a valuable experience about our further digitizing need and prospects. Archival holdings or objects in our collection are of more use when they are accessible to the public in a meaningful way. Searchability of the online archive becomes a challenge, and more content is when more content is online, and this is specifically now with the second collection the case. We hope that we will not only have festivals like the Festival d'Histoire de Montréal that benefits from our online archive. We are also launching the event with the research workshops, and will add other events to use the online archive. While we hope to create an enjoyable online experience, in the end, we like to allow the public to use the museum's content for their own projects, research or other. We are currently testing if we can include some of the digitized content also in our online shop for sale in a high resolution to increase auto-generated revenues that the museum is needed desperately. Should we be able, we would like to continue also to apply for the grant from the Library and Archives of Canada to add additional digitized content of eventually other collections. And further, we hope that we can create curated online exhibitions on subjects related to the digitized media that we both organizations have gathered together. And we would like to also invite other organizations to contribute specifically to these online exhibitions. And Louis has the second part of the
almost 10 years ago, our local community radio station, university station, CKUT 90.3 on FM, invited us to start hosting a radio show to play some of the treasures from our archives, especially Montreal music. So our weekly radio program, Montreal Sound Arc, starting tomorrow, as it is every Friday afternoon, will feature some selections of the music that was freshly digitized. It's really great to have something that is fair use and be able to play some of these treasures on the radio. Looking forward to playing these really great, high quality, great sounding digitizations. We won't have to wear out these rare records for at least a few more years until the formats evolve again. beyond getting these out there on our radio show, of course, it'll be a lot of fun to continue with some of the research that we started for this. The pandemic cut off a number of opportunities to meet with folks, but there's no question that we as an organization try to find the time to speak with and record interviews and do oral histories when we have people from the past that we've met. So continue the research, in fact, and probably put on some blog posts about what we've found out about how the record industry, how the local pressing plants and the independent labels that worked with them worked. Of course, we really do hope that sometime after this presentation, we can maybe host an event with the Berliner Museum to continue to celebrate this project, get it better known, and share the knowledges and experiences that we've had from it. So I guess that's it for my end. And if there's any time for some quick questions, and we'll throw it back to the moderator.
I mean, I have some words as a reflection on the collaboration. Montreal is a fascinating city, but it's also sometimes quite difficult because of the tension between the two language groups. And I'm an immigrant, so for me, English is the more convenient language. I still struggle with French. So it was really important for me that ARCMTL is able to communicate with me in the language of my preference, while we both share the love and the curiosity towards all parts of Montreal's culture. Louis' organization really contributed to the museum by opening our eyes for certain aspects that we had a little bit overlooked. I further learned the value of the trust we have in each other's organization, and I think that's very important. The ability to perform on a high professional level, respecting different priorities when it comes to workflow and time management. The communication between the two teams worked out very well, but there Mariana was really paramountly important. She is an amazing communicator and team builder, and I am very fortunate to have her on my team. And I'm also looking forward to do more collaborations with ARCMTL and eventually also to reach out to other organizations with the positive experience we have gained. Thank you. And we are still open for questions.
Thank you, everyone. A quick question before we have to move on to the next presentation. What were some of the highlights, maybe one person could share, what were some of the highlights working with each other between the community archive and the museum?
Mariana, would you take over, or Louis?
Well, I guess on the production side, I was more involved in the creation of the digital objects and the production, and the Gaëtan Pilon, who was working with them for many, many years, had a very long experience in digitizing, especially 78s, and doing the research on the exact curves to use, the different record labels that had different tweaks and things. So it was definitely very eye-opening. But also being able to talk to on some of the folks like the record producer Dennis Pantis, who self-described king of the 45 RPM single, produced and released hundreds of them in the 1960s. It was a real pleasure to have an excuse to call him repeatedly and chat about his experiences in those days.
Yeah. For me, I would say the biggest highlight was getting to work with Janice. I think small institutions sometimes tend to work in silos as to what workflows or what standards they use. There's a lot of self-taught procedures that need to be put in place. So for me, at least, it was very encouraging to get to have those discussions with a fellow archivist and get to hash out some of the challenges for description that trying to adapt to an established standard or schema led to, which was at least a first for me, and a personal interest in getting the museum a little bit better set up for flexibility and growth in the digital procedures and digital collections in the future.
Yeah, I mean, a highlight was also to see that an obscure person like Herbert Berliner, who's nevertheless incredibly important for the development of Canada's music industry, that we could find out so much, and that we had actually quite a rich collection to reflect his influence and the influence of his company. that is certainly something. Without this project, we wouldn't have gained that much insight.
Thank you so much. I want to encourage all presenters to also make use of the Hublot Lounge to continue discussions with attendees. There's also another question in the chat that if one of you can take a look and answer that.